Hey, you guys. Um, we're going to talk about fundamentalism this morning and evangelicalism. Fundamentalism, evangelicalism crammed together. I call it fundagelicalism. I always have. Um, that's something that I've struggled with through my years because almost every church we've ended up in is fundagelical, including the last one we just left. That was fundagelical. So we're going to talk about evangelicalism and money. And if you don't know me, I'm Suzanne Titkemeyer. I used to write for Pathos for nearly 10 years, a column called No Longer Quivering about the quiverful movement. What I'm talking about today is something distinctly different. It's not necessarily quiverful. It can be part of quiverful. It's something that I experienced a lot of growing up. Well, not growing up, but I'm saying when my kids were growing up. Hey, this is an old shirt from J.C. Penney's. I still hang on to it, even though it's threadbare almost. It's not as dark as it once was either. So this morning, I had to laugh because this morning was pure evangelicalism out of control. I've stopped going to church here because we have about 2,500 new cases of beer virus every day, and I'm not willing to do that. It's too risky to go to church. The churches here, the evangelical churches that my husband loves, they don't wear masks. No one does, even though there is a mask mandate in place. My husband did. I did. I thought I just told him weeks ago that I cannot go any longer until the rates go down. Plus, I don't believe that way anymore. And I don't think he actually believes that way anymore either. It seems to be just a social thing for him because he was mentioning somebody's having their birthday, they're going out after church, and I was like, fine, go. Well, here is where it gets really funny. I have to tell the story before I get started. There's this church my husband started going to. It was one of two we visited after we left our original church here that we've been going to for 4 years because of the dog hair issue. Anyway, long story short, it's a huge church. There's a couple of hundred members. They're packed to the gills. Nobody's wearing a mask. The pastor's had COVID 2 or 3 times and several variants of it. And so have many of the members. Yet, COVID's not real, according to them. Or it's not as much of a blood of Jesus. Anyway, they're all saying all kinds of goofy, crazy things. Okay, so I've stepped out from that world. I still believe in God, but what I believe in and what I think he probably is way different than what they're worshiping in their evangelical churches. I don't think they have much of a clue what the divine looks like. Small town Jewel, I'm doing that now a lot. The other day I ran out. What did I do? Oh, I had to take my new computer to the shop. That was the day I went to the shop because I know those guys. And I went to the high-end grocery store here, and it was a cluster. I came out crying. That's how bad it was. But at least everybody was masked. Social distancing, not so much. So long story short, this morning, I got to back up. Last night, my husband got a call from a lady. I'm not gonna say any real names because I don't want anybody getting all hostile and upset. I call her in my mind Velma. It's close to her real name, but not her real name. Velma's got to be 85 if she's a day. Now, I don't hold anything against her because she started a major ministry that feeds a lot of people in this area. And she's a local American that helps out Ticos tremendously. I think she's also slipping too, because I've had conversations with her lately where she called me up and complained that her internet didn't work, and I tried to troubleshoot her internet, and it turned out there was no electricity. So I had to explain, no electricity means no internet, and she was just very bent out of shape. Then she said she was coming over right in to sit in my hot tub, and I said, well, it's going to take 2 hours for the hot tub to get hot because we don't leave it on 24/7. We only turn it on. We know one of us is going to sit in it or you're going to sit in it. So she was all huffing and arguing with me about how the sunlight should warm the hot tub to hot. I'm like, that's not how hot tubs. Yeah, she's there. Pork is there. That's not how hot tubs work. So I'm setting the stage here. She calls Jim yesterday and says, I'm going to hot tub tomorrow, so turn the hot tub on. At least she remembered that this time. And wanted to know if Jim could give her a ride in the church. And Jim said, church, most Sundays he does, which he has to go up to the next little village up here to pick her up, which is 5 or 6 minutes away. Well, he's got this friend Dave from our old church that also asked her a ride. Now, Dave lives 6 minutes towards Tama. So Jim said, sure, I'll pick you up after I pick up Dave. Well, Velma lost it. She was not having it. So Jim had to call Dave and said, sorry, I can't give you a ride, blah, blah, blah. All this. Anyway, long story short, you know what, of phone calls back and forth, of fighting, of craziness about church, who's going where, who's what, blah, blah, blah. It's small town Jewel. I think we're dealing with some issues of maybe Alzheimer's, or when you start, sort of disremembering when you get old and you get cranky. I think that's what we're dealing with. But between all the phone calls with her and everybody else, friend down the street, she leads worship. Jim was just running hither and yon this morning, and I was kind of laughing and going, why are you doing this? And he's like, sometimes I'm too nice of a guy. And I was like, no, you're not too nice of a guy. You just let people from church take advantage of you. You always have, you always will, because you want to be seen as a nice guy. I stopped doing that sometime before. And I'm after him to do that, to learn to say no. And that is my lesson for you this morning before I start talking about money. Say no. Learn how to say no. Because if you don't, you're going to be taken advantage of left and right. And I've had to function that way in Jim's life some. I've had to be the person to say, no, you can't do that, and this is why. And sometimes I can see him going visibly, oh, thank God. Somebody is going to prevent me from doing this thing that I don't really want to do in the first place. It's an inconvenience. So all of this also plays into money here, because if there's nothing I know about evangelical churches, equivocal churches, it's their troubled relationship to money, which is the big thing I want to talk about today. And I say I've already lost some viewers because I've been ranting about my own, watching my husband running around. That's cool. Anyway, evangelical world and money is the most problematic thing in the world. Hard truth about all these churches. Now, I don't know if this extends to the big ones like the Methodist or whatever, or the Catholic Church, or some of the bigger the bigger Protestant churches. This plays a huge part in evangelicalism. Money. Usually you have people with money, they run things. The pastor will tell you, oh no, I love everybody equally, I listen to everybody equally. That is a pile of garbage. And not only that, a lot of people in these evangelical churches have very weird relationships with money that they will extrapolate on others. I remember one time we had a worship team end of the year get together, and I got stuck hosting it because I have a time in Virginia, we had a community swimming pool 4 houses down from where we live. So I ended up hosting a lot of things. I hosted baptism every year for years until I finally learned to say, no, I'm not doing this anymore. I don't care what you think. It's a huge imposition for me to host baptism. And it was, because nobody would help and you do it all. So here we are. We're having like 10 of us, 10, 20 of us on worship team. We're having our little get together. Everybody's got their million potato salads and things. And a friend of mine, one of the ladies on the team, went back to my house to use the bathroom. And she came back and she chewed me out. Why? Because I had fancy toilet paper. Fancy toilet paper. I had bought Charmin. Since when did Charmin, hey, Cheryl, turn into fancy toilet paper? I would love to know. It was just the standard thing I bought. Well, it came out later. Somebody talked to me about what this person said. This person, Wanda. Hey, Maria. This person, Wanda, was extremely jealous of everybody who had anything that was not her. Wanda had been part of our fundamentalist quiverful church for a long time. Her husband didn't work because in fundamentalism, in evangelical quiverful, you were not supposed to work for a boss if you were a guy. The thinking was that you work for yourself. Well, her husband, Jerry, was never very successful for working for himself. He finally filed for disability on his back, and he cut people's lawns on the sideline for money. Wanted to work full time. And they lived in what was basically a travel trailer, a rather large travel trailer, but like an old one from the 60s. They knocked the wall out and put what was like a little addition, I don't want to call it a shack, but it was not much more than that. They lived like that. And I knew they didn't live in the lap of luxury, but I had no idea how they lived, that it was like that until later. And once I knew that, I understood where Wanda was coming from. Many of the people at the old evangelical quiverful church that I went to lived some very, I'm going to say it, just come around and say it, substandard lives. They shot themselves in the foot because they had this belief system that women never work, Wanda was an exception, and that men should always work for themselves. They should start a business and do, well, that works fine, okay, for some people, but not for everyone. You can't make that as a rule. And as a rule, most of the people there had no idea how to handle their money. So many times I could tell you so many tales of people I knew that ran their credit card sky high while screeching that they weren't even supposed to use a credit card because using a credit card was sinful because all debt is sinful. No, all debt is not sinful. How you use your debt, how you use your money, that could run into some problems that you might want to call sinful. But you can't really say that it all was. So that's why I tend to get very frustrated and upset when I see people like Lori Alexander who are pretty well-to-do, financially well-to-do, and their only financial advice to somebody is buy used, save the difference, and don't use credit cards. The world of, financial health is way bigger than just don't use credit cards. I would say don't spend lavishly if you don't have the money to spend lavishly. A lot of people in evangelical quiverful that I knew skipped that part. They thought God wanted them to have the finest, even though they was kind of like the old saying, a champagne taste on a beer budget. I saw a lot of that. And at the same time, I've seen these pastors that grovel for the few wealthy people or the few working people who have decent amounts of money in their congregation. Oh, thanks, Melly Lynn. So anyway, most of these people would just spend it and say, well, God's going to bless me. I'm one of the elect. I'm one of the chosen. While the pastor is sucking up to the few families with money, the few that come, that have a decent amount of wages. It got so bad in my old church after I left that the pastor called a meeting in which he had sent out an email speculating on everyone's incomes and started pounding on them for not tithing the full 10%. We left. We had been tithing the full 10%, and we were like one of the few. When I ended up at the Methodist church, and we ended up counting the offering every week, my husband became kind of the head of that because it was a huge church. I mean, it wasn't unusual for them to take in $50,000 on a Sunday, and not everybody tithed. So that's what I was going to say. Almost no one tithed that 10%. There were some that were super generous and gave way beyond the 10%. And then you had a lot of people throwing a buck in. So I think that's pretty much standard now in all churches, as far as I can tell. You have a few people that are cheerful givers that give enormously. You have a few that don't. And the ones that give the most seem to think they run the place. I got to see that here at the old church we were going to here. Well, I can't say it's old. It's 7 or 8 year old church. We went there 4 of those years. There was a guy, it's the same guy I told the tale about the millionaire that was upset. The billionaire was upset with the swimming pool because it was built at it. I can help, even though it's probably $30,000-$40,000 that he threw down the drain by doing that. He had the pool torn out, and they're rebuilding it to his specifications, which who knows what that is. I don't know what he's got in his brain. So anyway, this guy, he has, hey, Sea Breeze, he has this idea. Yeah, I've seen it too, Cheryl, in non-evangelical churches. That's why I mentioned the Methodist church. It's not an evangelical church, but I saw the same things. The rich people controlling. So anyway, rich controlling. Not to the evangelical church number 1 we were going to here. That's all I'm going to call it. And decided he didn't like the way the pastor did anything. He was on worship team. He didn't like the way worship team was run. He didn't like nothing. He also thought because he was a billionaire and he had so much money that he could run everything. Well, this is one of the few cases where I saw the pastor just say, hold up. Basically, he ended up leaving finally, and he took his billions to a church number 2 we visited. He's rebuilding their church, even though there's only 2 couples there. They only have 2 couples in their church, and sometimes a third set every now and then. So there's that. And it was the only time I've ever seen in the years that I've been going to church where somebody with a pile of money was not able to influence the direction of the church. Usually you see that. And usually you have a lot of members that don't have much, who are scraping along, looking at the ones like this guy and the others and not understanding how he has all that money, whether it was luck, inheritance, just being at the right place at the right time, starting the right business, because this guy does own a business worth billions of dollars that he started. But he's also brilliant, too. He's one of the smartest people I've ever met. He's also one of the dumbest at the same time. So finances really run these churches. Yeah, there are dress codes at some of these churches, Mel Lynn. They really are. Floorless skirts, long sleeves, turtlenecks, their hair's in bun. Yeah, you got it. You got it. Some of them do this. Holiness churches will do that, especially. So all these dress codes, all these things. Here, there's no dress code, but there's the same old games. They're playing the same old games with money. Now, I understand with these evangelical churches, they have to have money to survive. They have to pay the pastor something. At our church back in the States, our Fundamentalist Quiverful church, what happened was a bunch of people left. There was a huge split over Toronto Airport Christian Fellowship. All the people who were going to the conferences split away and started going to various other churches. Everybody who didn't want that stayed, and they were all the ones that were mowing the lawn for money or unsuccessfully farming, all kinds of stuff like that. So it really cut up the money flow to the point where the pastor did that. And then he started taking money from different accounts like dower funds to pay for instruments for worship team, and started paying himself out of it. And then when the money ran out, he kind of peaced out. He said, I'm leaving. So now he's in another church in Northern Virginia, part of the same network of churches, but they don't let him anywhere near the money, which makes me laugh because it's kind of forgive and forget, but don't let them near whatever it was that they did wrong in the first place, which I think is actually kind of wise. Hey, Noelle. So I'm just ranting about money in some of these stupid churches. And then there's a lot of, oh yeah, Seabreeze. He is mega rich. I was at his church the first weekend it opened. I just happened to be in Houston that weekend. It was pretty crazy. Yes, Ben Seawall is a perfect example of this. Don't work for anybody else. Just make money by running your own business or doing your own thing. The Rodriguezes are another bunch that I call them grifting for Jesus, because they have decided, instead of holding real positions somewhere, instead of even having a business like a lot of these evangelical fundamentalist families will, their quote business is a ministry, and they go around half the year in their little camper singing and passing the plate and doing revival. Now, I have never heard her husband give a sermon. I heard a couple of her sons, and I was not impressed. So it seems to be a thing that they don't believe in working. The Rodriguezes don't, a lot of other people don't. They don't seem to realize that if they really wanted to bless people and have a ministry, that working during the week would be a thing. It would be a done thing. People would do it, but they don't do any of that, which I, for the life of me, don't understand. And then I turn around, I look at YouTube culture, and I look at people that have decided they're never going to work again. They're just going to do more and more crazy content. KJ and others. That they're just not going to work. They're just going to do this thing. The money will come in. Not all people have business sense, or they don't have enough education to make good decisions. Cheryl, that is very true. And I've known a lot of them that have done that. And then you have the mega churches. You have the Joel Osteens. Now, I'm going to give Joel a tiny pass on some of his wealth. He's written those books, and then he has people like my husband standing in line panting to buy these books. I read his books, and for what they are, they're okay. They're just basically have positive thoughts and God will bless you. That I could boil it down in that one sentence, all of his books, all of them. But he has people that need that in their lives. My husband needs to be reminded of that, or he can get kind of maudlin. So I try not to beat up on Joel too much, at least not around him, because I'm looking at Joel during these various hurricanes and him not opening his huge church, his shelters, things like that. I'm just kind of horrified. Did anybody see when Joel marched with Black Lives Matter? I got to give him props for doing that too, because here's this white guy in Houston, which does have a large brown and black person and population, and he's marching with them for racial justice. And he looked about as uncomfortable as can be while he was doing it, but he did it. It's good to get out of the box and do those things that make us feel uncomfortable sometimes, and it might have been a good thing for him. I have seen his wife preach. It's pretty bizarre. My little mom loved him. She was tickled to death when his services were on TV. Yeah, the Rodriguez family, they're not good at anything. That's what blows my mind. They can't sing worth a damn. They can't play instruments worth a damn. Their printing services look pretty bad. Every time she prints up something to promote something like her women's retreat or whatever, there's always misspellings. There's always weird ways the words are put together. I'm just looking at that going, I don't know who did that, but it was not anybody with any kind of design sense or artistic ability or spelling skills. It was just somebody with a third grade homeschool education. And Jill, to be fair to Jill, was raised that way. She was homeschooled, and she was raised in this nonsense that she's living in now. Now, I don't know what her parents did for a living, but she came by this honestly, by her mother. So there's that. Seabreeze, me too. When he would not open up the megachurch for hurricane victims and people that needed shelter, that turned me off too. That's a bad move. I think that you have to do that. I mean, that was one of the things that I liked about our Methodist church, is that we hosted the homeless once a month. Well, at first it was once a month, and then after that it got to be more as more churches joined, because we didn't have a homeless shelter in our town. So what we started doing was we started hosting these people. And the community raised money. We put together, I'm not going to say cots because they were nice at the cots, maybe like rollaway beds, bedding, the whole 9 yards. And I didn't mean they ran to Walmart. They did a good job with it. And I sometimes would spend the night there for that because I would have to go in there and sleep in the women's section. Several that were homeless actually were struggling with mental health and or substance abuse issues. And if you did not have somebody there from the church, one person in the women's, one person in the men's, things would happen sometimes. There'd be interpersonal feuds, all kinds of crazy things. But we got it down to a science, and I felt good about it. I mean, I thought that was a good outreach to the community. That and the soup kitchen, the food pantry, those were all good outreaches. Those are practical things you can do to help somebody who doesn't have it, which I don't think there are that many churches that actually do that. Yeah, they have 1,600 seats, and I'm sure they have enough space to put cots in and the money to do it. Oh, wow. Cheryl, I'm glad to hear that because I heard so many times of and it was like during Hurricane Katrina, I saw a lot of this too. Very wealthy churches would not open their doors. Yet a lot of small churches were letting people come in and live for weeks. It was kind of heartbreaking because the week before Katrina hit, I was in Houston with my aunt, and we were going to a tour. Okay. One group of people that we befriended and hung out with quite a bit was a church in Harvey, Louisiana, a black church that was very evangelical. I also hung out with priests and some Catholics and some Jews and some various, just all over the place. That was one thing I did like about Toronto, is they did seem to bring everybody in. Well, a week later, that church in Harvey was destroyed, and I've often thought about those people and wondered how they are and where they are. And it was the small churches that were taking in people and were doing all the junk that needed to be done. I mean, there's just no way about it. When I went down to New Orleans around Christmas time after Katrina, and that was after having been down several times to help do rebuild stuff. I mean, to clean, I should say, not rebuild, because at first it was cleaning. When I got to New Orleans and I saw the garbage, I'm not going to say garbage, let's just say storm detritus. People's ruined lives piled 20 feet high in the boulevards of New Orleans, in the center spaces where there were so many lovely trees, were cram-packed with the wreck of everyone's lives. It was just heartbreaking to see that. And while I was still going to Fundy Town then, I was on the edges of it, I noticed who it was that was jumping in to help. And it was people who maybe didn't have the most money. It was churches that weren't super well funded. It was not any of the mega churches. I saw very little mega church involvement at all. Wealthy people are like wealthy churches. The more you have, the tighter you hold it. Joyce Meyer is definitely another one. That's one of the things that I've said about Gwen Shamblin and other mega churches. They don't tend to, I don't want to categorize them all that way, because I have seen some mega churches that help, but a lot of them don't. I mean, all you have to do is look at the behaviors coming out of Bethel Redding to see what a megachurch does during a pandemic. Instead of reaching out to those that are unemployed that could use groceries, gas money to pay the electric bill, instead of reaching out to the community to do those things, their response is to send plague rat Sean Fouch, I guess I say pronounce his name, Fouch, I don't know, all over the U.S. to do worship concerts where everybody is packed in like sardines. No one's wearing masks. And it's like, COVID likes this. That was what they decided. That's one thing that always bothers me about the Kleenex. When stuff like this happens, a lot of baits And some Duggars go, and she always throws it down like it's a bad thing they're helping. Small town Jewel, I'm going to say it's a problematic thing they're helping. I will actually almost agree with her on that. Why? Because of some of the behavior of the Bates with their medic organization. They've done some scummy things with it. One of the scummiest things they did that was reported on by somebody actually in the Bahamas was when they had the hurricane that destroyed a lot of the Bahamas. They showed up to help and they seized all the airplane fuel, the jet fuel. They seized it. Even though it didn't belong to them, they took control of it and were doling it out as they saw fit to different agencies and charging them for it. So they were down there profiting. They're profiteering, even though nobody says that. Now, they're down right now in Haiti, and I don't know how that's going or what they're doing. Now, if they're actually helping out, more power to them. If they're seizing the fuel and profiteering from it, that just plain old sucks. And that's the other thing with fundamentalists and money is when they do finally get some money and they will sometimes behave in some pretty sleazy, squishy things. Like a good example was the Duggars were filmed giving away food, bags of food at a thrift shop one day. That was part of their show, was filmed. And here's the thing that makes me crazy about it. It was reported that after the filming stopped, the people all gave the food back, and the food was stuff like Doritos and junk food in the first place. So it wasn't like they were giving away beans, rice, powdered milk, actually nutritious food that people would eat, cans of tuna, the kind of stuff that people need when they don't have a dime to rub together so they can stretch it as far as they can. None of that. And they took the food back. They are in Haiti. And it's good that they transport children to hospitals. So there are some good things they do. But when they were down in the Bahamas, they all had guns. And they didn't declare their guns when they came in. They did a lot of things that were just very morally squishy. And they wrapped it in, we're here for Jesus, which I've seen happen so many times in my old evangelical church and throughout the evangelical world, is they behave badly, they trample local laws, they bring guns, they do whatever. And I've heard about the Duggars giving away just to take it back. Yes, they do that stuff. I'm really shocked about it, that they would do that stuff. No, they stuck with just transporting sick children and showing up at these places to be first. Well, they're not even trained to be first responders. And here's the other thing I want to rant about with that situation. First responders aren't needed in Haiti and places like that. Why? Because first responders usually scoop and run. They grab the person, they stabilize them, they take them to the hospital. What do you do when there's no hospital to take them to? Well, you have to triage, but more than that, you have to treat. You have to treat as best you can with whatever supplies you have. It's not a matter of doing the EMT thing. It's a matter of doing life-saving type things and trying to stabilize people so that they can receive the medical care they need in place and maybe stay in a tent until they're recovered. It's not at all like it was. Hey, Bliss. If ever you see the commercials early in the AM, the dang preacher sowing the seed, send $50 seed, he was blessed. Full makes me so angry. See, Breeze, I know who you're talking about, but because I don't know if it's COVID brain, it's stroke brain, or it's senior citizen senility kicking in, but I don't remember that guy's name, but I know exactly who you're talking about. He is a con artist who has been slapped on the wrist a number of times by the FTC for saying that stuff. He is, there's several of them that do that. I think one of them was Robert Tilton, and John Oliver did a very funny segment on him and sowing the seed with him, but he's not the one I'm talking about. The one that's late night is a different guy, but I can't think of his name. But he always has these amounts of seeds that he wants you to sow. Sow your seed, reap the benefits, like God is some kind of holy slot machine. That's also evangelical, magical money thinking. They will do that. And churches will say that too. They will say, Give generously and get generously. If you give the $5, you'll get 50 back. And just so on, world without end. And I've seen people give generously when they did not have the money to give. And I'm just like sitting here watching somebody I know that can barely feed their kids and they're giving. And I'm like, please don't do that. Between your essential oil purchases, your Lexus, and this, you're driving your starving family into bankruptcy. And when they exploit these people, it makes me sick. Exactly. He sends out the miracle water. I know who you're talking about. Like I said, he's been in trouble with the federal government, the FTC, a number of times, that guy has. And he is a holy con artist. To mega churches and the whole Evangelical movement was many years ago in living in Baton Rouge, being exposed to brother Jimmy Swaggert and his wife Frances, the whole 9 yards of them. And I wasn't taken in, even though I was a young woman then. I was in college. Look, And every time anybody would try to proselytize to me from that church or from like churches, I was like, It took me have a crisis before I fell into the trap of this with my youngest child. So I got to see Swaggert and Co. up close and personal, because I worked at a jewelry store in college, a high-end manufacturing jewelry store where Frances used to buy jewelry all the time. And I would look at her coming in there and buying diamonds and thinking, what is wrong with this picture? They're ministers. They shouldn't be living on the fanciest street in all of Baton Rouge, and they shouldn't be buying diamonds left and right. I would also see Frances going to the boutique next door to the jewelry store and buying high-end designer gear. And this was before everybody had to have a Coach purse, $10 at the thrift store. And before designer goods became mainstream, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So she would do that, and I would see this and think, those people are just scammers. And they got in all kinds of trouble later on. And one of the things that happened was, I guess, if you remember, as old as me, you remember Jimmy Swaggert got caught with a prostitute. And it was a $5 one, $10 one, and like the easiest no-tell motel. Apparently, he hung out with her a lot there. Now, about 6 months before this was exposed, my father called me, and my father was kind of an interesting dude. He was in his spare time, he was a clown, okay? I mean, full-on makeup, Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey style, old style clown. And he did that for years. I always thought it was embarrassing, but now I kind of look back and say, that's pretty cool. What he did for a living, which is what I can't understand about Fundytown, they don't want to work for a living. He was the president of a bank. He owned his own loan company for many years. He worked at much bigger banks in their different departments. And he was either vice president or president of banks for many years. So he had a legitimate straight up gig that gave him a decent salary. And then he did his clowning on the side. Well, anyway, finally changed my name properly. Okay, Tracy S. Good afternoon. So he called me about 6 months before Jimmy got busted and said, Suzanne, you are never going to believe who I just saw. And I was like, no telling? I know how you are. There's no telling who it was. He said, I just saw Jimmy Swaggert in Jack Saban's with a high-end escort. And I went, Dad, will you mix up your meds again? I was giving him a hard time about it, going, I don't think so, dude. They're scamming and skimming, but I don't think he's sleeping with hookers. I just don't see that. Jack Saban's was a really fancy steakhouse in Baton Rouge. So for Swaggert to be there with a high-end call girl is pretty outrageous. Tracy, that's fine. We all are. Well, yeah, I think it's cool now, Seabreeze, but I didn't think it was cool when I was growing up. I was kind of like, Dad, you're so damn embarrassing. So he would call me and tell me these weird little things. I just thought this was just some weird little thing. He was calling to tell me in Germany because I was living in Germany at the time. And sure enough, the Swaggert thing broke, and he had been sleeping with these crazy, inexpensive prostitutes at these no-tell motels in the back of Beyond. And I was like, I was just shocked. He thought he was. And here's where it's really tragic, what he did and everything. Through, I guess, the early 80s, must have been, because it was like 81, I met him, and it was not a pleasant experience. I have to tell you that story. It's a crazy one. Swaggert got so famous that he was building not just a church, he built this fabulous church, but he put in a Bible college, he put in a television studio, he put in a studio, he put in just building after building after building off Segan Lane in Baton Rouge. Millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars he borrowed to make this happen, and then he begged from his supporters. Well, when it came out he'd been doing this, almost everybody dumped him that was going to his church to give him zillions of dollars. In the aftermath of that reveal, it almost took down Louisiana National Bank, and it just about took down American Bank. And I think my father was still working at American as the VP then, but he called and told me about it. It was pretty awful because of what Swaggert was doing. He impacted the jobs of hundreds, maybe even thousands of people. Now, I used to hate the fact that the whole Swaggert organization was on Segan Lane because it was very near my place of employment, which meant I saw those people on a regular basis. I also, when I went to college, I worked a pile of stupid, crazy jobs. One of my stupid, crazy jobs was delivering air freight. I did that off and on for about a year and a half. One day we got a call on a late Friday afternoon saying, hey, we got these 3 big crates that need to go to Swaggert's new place on Segan Lane. Well, I was up for the weekend. I was a person who was on call to transport all the crap that people needed on the weekends. So I got down to the Delta Air Terminal, used a forklift, put all the stuff into my truck, and there were huge crates, very heavy, computer equipment. I guess in those days, computers were huge and expensive and all that. Well, I got them to Swaggert's place, and I'd called ahead and said, because this is Friday, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, I said, hey, you need a forklift to get these off the truck because I cannot lift them off the truck. And they said, no problem, we'll get them off the truck because you're not going to be able to. Oh, he did, Seabreeze. I saw that. So I got down there. Not only was there no forklift, there wasn't even a concrete pad poured to the back of the building where they wanted these things delivered. So I brought my truck to the very edge of where the concrete was poured and said, hey, I don't know how you're going to get these off, but here they are. Swaggert was there. There was a pile of guys in suits, and that was it. That's the 70s. I drove alone cross country trips. Swaggert preach. Yes. For a blessed piece of cloth. Cheryl, that's what he did. So ended up, after a lot of arguing and fighting and calling back and forth to my boss, they ended up taking these crates off the truck. I got to watch sweating, balding men in suits tromping through the mud, carrying these heavy, huge things. And the very last little bit, they hadn't picked up the last one, Swaggert made the mistake of opening his mouth to me and saying that I was taking a job from a man. and that I needed to stop doing what I was doing and let a man take that job. You know what I did with the final crate? I got behind that sucker and I pushed it right off into the mud. And then I spun tires out of there. I was mad. Yeah, so strange. Definitely strange. It was a experience. And I was kind of rebellious then. So I was flying the double birds while I was burning rubber out of there. We called you, blah, blah, blah. This is your problem. I'll talk to Suzanne about her filthy mouth, because I did fly the birds and say every obscene word there was in the world, Jimmy Swaggert. So that's I cussed out Jimmy Swaggert story. So I could never take him seriously after that. After that point, it was like, no, talk to the hand. And when my father was going there for about 6 months, it was like, oh, Dad, what are you thinking? So he quit going there because Swaggert preached about women wearing pants. And my dad was there with a woman who was wearing pants. They both very super offended and left. But up until that point, my dad was a sold out Swaggertite. And I could not believe that. I was like, Dad, I tried to talk to him about it. He said, he's a con artist. He's a con artist. Well, there's that. Sweaty balls. Yeah, I would have said sweaty balls if I had thought about it. I just said nasty stuff. People sent money. He would talk about his so long radio shows, opening letters for people in desperate situations until I needed more and sent him money. And that's the tragic thing. I had neighbors that worked for Swaggert, worked in the mailroom, opening those envelopes and those prayer requests. And they started out as faithful, happy believers to be working for Swaggert. Into 6 months, both of them got fired for various things. And they told me horror stories out of the ministry about the money. Like I said, I've seen them spend the money. I heard about them taking in the money. I cussed out Swaggert. And I was kind of a wild girl before I got married. I was just not caring, flying the bird, driving my motor scooter around, not really caring about what anybody thought, because I'd been through so much with my ex-husband that after my short-lived first marriage, I kind of was just not having it from anybody. You know what Jimmy reminds me of? The Joker from Batman movies. Yes. Francis and their son Donnie, who I have a pile of tales I could tell you about Donnie in Baton Rouge, but I'm not going to bore you. They started a radio show, and one of my best friends, who's still in the Fundamentalist lifestyle, told me, so I just love listening to Donnie and Francis. And I just started giggling. I told her all the stories of Francis and Donnie, and including the documentaries exposed that entire ministry. And she was just left slack-jawed that she didn't even know this stuff about them. Fake, cheesy, fixed smile. Oh, yes, send the money. Noelle, I'm so sorry to hear that. I know a lot of people's elderly family members do that. When my husband went to see his mother, about 10 years ago, we almost lost her then. He had to go down there and stay with her for a full month. She was staying at a retirement home. Nice apartment. It was a really nice setup, called Williamsburg in Baton Rouge. Well, she was in and out of hospital with low oxygen levels. They finally figured out what was wrong with her and got her straightened out after about a month, but it took a month of going back and forth, and just various things. One of the things that he did is he looked at her checkbook. Well, she had also done that. She had given huge sums to some of these televangelists. So he and his brother had to put a stop to all the money she was giving out. She was just giving stuff out willy-nilly. And they put a stop to it and took her checkbook away from her. She would have been 90 at that point, and it would have not been, they're exploiting 90-year-olds. They don't care. They just want the money. Hey, Real. Hey, did you have any ween thrown in your chat last night, or did it work out? I laughed when I heard about that, because everybody I know has that happened to me once they take guests on? And I can't even figure out StreamYard enough to use it to be able to do that. We're doing, really, you missed it. I told my story about the time I cussed out Jimmy Swaggert. Hate on for radio pastors. Oh, women hated no one until the topic of radio platform came on. It's just nuts on hate. Yeah, there's that too. I used to always laugh when we drive through West Virginia. We'd go through West Virginia to go to my husband's family's home in Indiana. And you should hear some of the pastors on the radio in West Virginia. If you heard that, you would say, that explains the Rodriguezes, even though they're not West Virginian. So there's that. I remember listening to one where the pastor said that if you listen to GPS and there was a woman's voice, you were sinning because you were taking direction from a woman. So there was that. It went well, and last night too. She used a 3-minute clip without commentary, and that is a no-no. I warned her once. She's a striker. I know everybody else strikes for that. Small town Jewel, I have a million trillion stupid stories. Like I said, I got to 61 years old because I've lived through all this nonsense, and nonsense it is. And that is why you should never worry about giving money to any of these guys. None of these televangelists. You go to a church where they start putting the screws to you to give money, skedaddle on out of there and know they're toxic. They're trying to get as many little pennies as they can out of every single little stupid person they can. They don't care. They just want the money. So much of evangelical Christianity revolves around money. You got your people that don't have it. They're constantly worried about it. They're constantly jealous of everybody a step or two above them on the ladder. You got your people that are a step or two above the ladder that are worried about if they're given enough. Their pastors putting the screws to them and listening to them more than they're listening to people down here. So it's a crazy situation, and it's a crazy making situation. And none of them have any idea on proper money management. We used to get a lot of crap at our old church because I would sometimes work, depending upon my health and our financial needs, and my husband worked for the federal government, which the federal government was a great Satan to them. So a lot of them, they'd say, how can you work for that? Blah, 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 blah. And when something bad would happen to people of a different color or a different class, they would be less than sympathetic. The one that struck me the most was when Hurricane Katrina happened. You know, I grew up in South Louisiana. I spent equal time in like New Orleans and the Baton Rouge area. And while Baton Rouge roughly escaped most of it, New Orleans was destroyed. And that to me was heartbreaking. I watched that unfold on TV, and I lay on the couch and I just wailed. And I'd just been through there a week before too. So it was really strange. Give away 10% until they're on the streets. I'm sorry to hear that. So I went to church, and people were coming up and asking me about Katrina because they know that I'm from that part of the world. I still have relatives there. The 13th Street Canal collapse of the levee was right by one of my aunt's houses, flooded her house to the second floor. They routed the water through some of it through Ninth Ward, which those people cannot possibly think to rebuild. So many of them said to me, well, it doesn't matter. New Orleans is full of sin. So this is just God cleansing New Orleans. I said, what about all these helpless people like in the Ninth Ward that can't afford to rebuild, that are just trying to live their lives? Well, that don't matter because they're not the right race, ethnicity, color. They're that sinful bunch. So I think for me, it was the first time I ever saw the kind of inherent racism that I suspected might lay behind the scenes, but I never, there were a lot of black and brown people down there, told a lot of them, they said, well, that's sin, that's sin, 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 that's why they're there. The oldest cathedrals in the entire United States is there. And there are a lot of black, brown, and white people that all attend that church. Henry just made landfall. I haven't kept up with that. Is that the one that's falling apart while it's hitting Connecticut? I hope so, because I would hate to think of anybody having to go through what Katrina did. For several years after Katrina, almost every single bit of spare money I had went to my family in Louisiana and to charities. Why? Because it was an incredible impact. Like I said, I was down in New Orleans almost immediately after it happened to help clean up, and then later around Christmas time because family. And it was heartbreaking. And we had relatives that disappeared that we did not know what their fate was. I had a great uncle that was in his 90s, Uncle Soch, and nobody knew what happened to him. He lived in a very old house and island, a Rhode Island. And we found because relatives tried to get him to evacuate, because when you live down there, you learn. When I was a kid, nobody evacuated. We just hauled mattresses in the hallway of your house, and you had a radio, canned food, and the adults drank. That was just what they did. But now people have seen, they've lived through Betsy, they've lived through Katrina. They tend to evacuate now, and I think that's a good thing. In fact, I don't even know why the mayor of New Orleans did not commandeer the bus system and put folks that could not flee because they had no way to flee and take them out of danger zone. I don't know why I didn't do that. I don't even know why I didn't even think about doing that. So everyone ended up in the Superdome, and it went south from there. So my family was pretty devastated. We found my great uncle a week and a half later, after the family had tried to get him to evacuate. He said, "No, I'm not leaving. I am not leaving my house and my big color TV for somebody to haul it off." Well, when the floodwaters started coming in and he started freaking out, what he actually did was he got on his bicycle. He got on his bicycle, and they found him in Gramercy. He went to the Gramercy police station. The reaction of people I knew. I ended friendships over it. It made me ill. My daughter and I were getting things together to send to rescue agencies. These people were offended by help. That was kind of my experience too. I ended some friendships over this deal because they're talking smack about relatives on all sides for me, and strangers that my heart broke for. It was just such devastation. And when I was down there in December, most of the restaurants weren't reopened. There wasn't drinking water at places. None of the street lights functioned. People were just doing four-way stops. And I will say this, the people of New Orleans, I saw this. People were cooperative afterwards and loving with each other. I saw a lot of that. And I was glad to see that. That's one thing I do miss about the South. Racism or not, where the rubber meets the road, you can always count on people there to help you out if they can, except for maybe the rich jerks. So there was that. Cheryl, I agree with that. Yeah, I know rich people in Texas would not give a dime. And so many people did die because they weren't allowed to take their pets. And that was one of the things that I was doing when I went down there. We were trying to round up people's exotic birds because they were being left for weeks at a time alone with no food or fresh water. And that's heartbreaking when you have to abandon a pet like that. It just is. And I'm going to say that again, too. I'm calling out the Cajun Navy. The Cajun Navy was the best thing in the world. When things happen in South Louisiana, the Cajun Navy comes together and busts ass to make it all better. And I'm proud to be Cajun. And that's a good thing. That it really is a good thing, some of the things that they do. Like I said, Louisiana is a really unique place in its own weird little way. I've never lived anywhere quite the same. I'm going to say this, when I made the transition from living there to Europe, it was not as much of a transition as Europe to the DC area was. I had a terrible time with that. And later I figured out it was because in South Louisiana and New Orleans, we have a number of very European attitudes and traditions that weren't a thing. Cajun Navy. Oh, if I couldn't take my hairy babies, I don't think I would go either. Small town Jewel, I wouldn't either. Especially here, because here, Pork is a rescue. She's a stray that just showed up about a year ago. It's kind of like, here I am, who was frightened of us, that soon came to trust us and has moved into the bedroom the last 6 months. The ones you don't see outside, I probably have 20 cats I'm feeding right now they're street cats. My little Stinky is a street cat that has money. There's no excuse for that. There are ways to make money. I'm frozen, of course. Of course. Going to and stream and.